Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for attending and being part of this important community conversation. Tonight, we have Baltimore community members, Johns Hopkins leadership, deans, faculty, students, and staff, representatives from the Baltimore Police Department, Baltimore Community Mediation Center, and 21 CP Solutions coming together to share in this important work around the Johns Hopkins Police Department. My name is Kara Ritter, and I will be the moderator for the evening. Before we get into the purpose of the meeting tonight and the agenda, just a reminder that a recording of the event will be available on the Johns Hopkins University Public Safety website. Tonight is the second of 3 town halls about the Memorandum of Understanding, or the MOU, between the future Johns Hopkins Police Department and the Baltimore Police Department. The MOU is the first step in defining Johns Hopkins Police Department and is geared toward ensuring clarity about how the JHPD and the Baltimore Police Department will interact and relate with each other, including jurisdiction, arrests, warrants, investigations, hiring, even officer compensation. Johns Hopkins University and its leadership want to hear from you on a variety of important topics about that responsibility and that relationship. MOUs are standard for all university police departments, and this draft MOU between Johns Hopkins University and Baltimore Police Department is being shared for public review and feedback as part of an effort to make this a more collaborative process. While the MOU is the focus of these town halls, these forums are part of a larger ongoing process aimed at advancing a dynamic, reimagined public safety system at Johns Hopkins that works for everyone. So there will be additional future and ongoing opportunities to share feedback. The agenda for the evening will run as follows. First, we'll have video remarks from Baltimore Police Commissioner Michael Harrison. Then I'm going to ask Dr. Branville Bard, Vice President of Public Safety for Johns Hopkins, to outline the larger vision for public safety. We'll provide some basic information about the purpose of an MOU and what's in this proposed MOU, because again, that's the focus of tonight's town hall. After introducing the MOU, we'll welcome Erica Bridgeford, the Executive Director of the Baltimore Community Mediation Center, who will introduce some discussion questions and explain the process for submitting comments and questions this evening. We'll spend the majority of this evening in a Q&A format with our panelists. We'll provide answers to commonly asked questions, questions that were submitted at last week's town hall, and questions submitted this evening. Then we'll have closing comments. We're now ready for the video comments from Commissioner Harrison.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. Welcome to our town hall. My name is Rodney Hill, Senior Advisor for Public Safety. I'm going to cover the Memorandum of Understanding, and it's just going to be a quick overview. Let me share my screen here. I'm going to get straight over to the. So the MOU talks about a number of different things. An MOU is simply an agreement between two agencies. In this case, it's an agreement between the Baltimore Police Department and the Johns Hopkins Police Department. It covers several points, and we're just going to glance and go over a few of them. The MOU is available for you to review yourself. One, it covers the jurisdiction of the Hopkins Police Department. There have been questions as to what the jurisdiction is. And currently, by way of the statute, the enabling statute for the Hopkins Police Department, the jurisdiction of the Johns Hopkins Police Department is limited to the Homewood campus, the Peabody campus, and the East Baltimore campus. We have the next three slides will be pictures with maps that specifically identify the campuses and the jurisdictions for the Johns Hopkins Police Department. This is the Homewood campus showing the jurisdiction from University Parkway over to Remington Avenue. The East Baltimore campus showing the jurisdiction from Caroline to from the west to Castle over in the east, Fayette Street to Eager Street. And the Peabody campus showing the jurisdiction Madison and further over near Center Street. So you can see on the maps the specific borderlines and where the jurisdiction lies for the Johns Hopkins Police Department. It also covers the responsibilities of the Hopkins Police Department, many of which are already laid out in statute, but the MOU goes a little bit more specific for certain things. The Hopkins Police Department will be the primary law enforcement unit agency on those three campuses we talked about. They will be a first responder for all calls for service, both emergency and non-emergency. And the Hopkins Police Department officers will, in fact, wear body-worn cameras. As I said, they will serve as the first responder for all calls. They will have the primary responsibility as the first responder. However, per the statute, the Baltimore Police Department, BPD, will be the lead for investigations of serious offenses and arrests, homicides, rape, human trafficking, things like that. The Hopkins Police Department will be primarily responsible for investigations of things such as burglary, theft, and less serious crimes. Notwithstanding, it doesn't stop the Johns Hopkins police officers from responding to those calls for service that occur on our campus. The MOU talks about the arrests and processing, and it makes clear that the Hopkins police, they will be responsible for their own transport. However, they will be allowed to use Baltimore police facilities, but they will be responsible for any arrestee in their custody. And they being the Hopkins police officers, must be in charge. They will be responsible for handling any writing of police reports, taking custody, and the remaining watch over any prisoners brought into the facility, charging documents and things like that. They will also obtain and execute arrest and search warrants, no different from any other police officer. And the MOU just talks about who will house them, where they will maintain. It talks about if the Hopkins Police Department officers are trying to execute a search warrant or arrest warrant somewhere in the city, they would have to work with the Baltimore Police Department. And it's very specific that the BPD will be lead agency if there's a serious situation, such as a barricade or hostage situation on the campus area. The agreement lays out the responsibilities. The statute talks about the Hopkins police will utilize the forensic services of the BPD, and the MOU goes a little bit further and where it lays out that we, being Hopkins Police, will be responsible for paying for certain things. The services that are utilized at the evidence control unit, that stolen vehicles will be impounded and stored in the Baltimore City lot. The MOU makes it clear that the Hopkins Police Department, because they work so closely with the Baltimore Police, because just the interoperability that will occur, that our policies and procedures will be consistent with the consent decree policies and procedures of the Baltimore Police Department, which is nothing more than constitutional policing. We will maintain all the reporting requirements by statute, public safety article, as well as the education article. The agreement talks about information sharing between the two parties and makes it clear that both the Hopkins Police and the Baltimore Police will in fact share information if needed for investigations and just overall basic intelligence to maintain safety of the campus and safety of the city. The Hopkins Police will have access to the Baltimore City Emergency Communications Center's computer-aided dispatch system, which will help in terms of Hopkins police officers responding to calls for service and communicating with the Baltimore Police Department. Both agencies have made an agreement per the MOU that the Hopkins Police will not directly solicit BPD officers to come work at Johns Hopkins. There's been agreement that Hopkins will not hire more than 5 sworn officers per year from the BPD, and an agreement that, notwithstanding the cap, that Hopkins will agree to not hire anyone who has not been separated from the BPD for at least 6 months. As I mentioned earlier, there's certain costs associated with things like forensics, and the Hopkins Police Department has agreed to cover certain additional costs as relates to certain expenses such as training, technology, and crime lab. And both parties have agreed to cover the costs for any type of civil situations involving their officers. So if there's any kind of misconduct and the BPD is being sued, they agree to cover the costs for BPD, and Johns Hopkins agrees to cover the costs for their officers in Johns Hopkins. Some things are laid out very clearly in statute, such as the jurisdictional boundaries. So the MOU cannot extend the boundaries that the General Assembly granted at Johns Hopkins Police Department. It lays out a definition of what a police officer is, even though it says University Police Department. Police officer, they're still police officers, as the state of Maryland identifies them in statute. The use of body-worn cameras, that can't be changed. Hopkins has committed to having their officers wear the body-worn cameras, and all the reporting requirements that are in the public safety article. That pretty much covers the MOU as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodney, for that overview. We will now have video remarks from Baltimore Police Commissioner Michael Harrison.
Excited to talk to you today about the new coordinated public safety. Greetings. I'm Baltimore Police Commissioner Michael Harrison. I'm excited to talk to you today about the new coordinated public safety effort between the Baltimore Police Department and Johns Hopkins. I want to assure each of you that the BPD team intends to work with the Johns Hopkins Police Department to ensure that they establish a small, community-focused, and highly accountable police force that functions in a way that is consistent with BPD's public safety strategies and the commitment to the consent decree. That said, we fully believe in a public input process, and that is why we're participating in these town hall sessions. I encourage each of you to take part in this process, participate in the public meetings, and share your feedback. It is going to take all of us to create a safer city and improve the quality of life for each and all of us. We all want to see Johns Hopkins Police Department succeed and create a safer and more welcoming campus for the residents, employees, and visitors of this historic and prestigious university. Thank you, be safe, and God bless.
It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Branville Bard, Vice President of Public Safety at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Bard joins Johns Hopkins with more than 28 years of experience in law enforcement and public safety. Known as a reform-minded pracademic who is heavily influenced by a sense of procedural and social justice, Bard believes you can keep communities safe from crime while also safeguarding the civil liberties of those who make up the community. Most recently, Bard served as the police commissioner for the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. He began his career as a member of the Philadelphia Police Department, where he proudly served for more than 2 decades before retiring at the rank of police inspector to become chief of police and director of public safety for the Philadelphia Housing Authority. Please welcome Dr. Bard.
Thank you. As Vice President for Public Safety for Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Medicine campuses, I'm one of the many people responsible for ensuring that our spaces are both safe and welcoming. I want to thank everyone for attending this forum and for being part of this valuable community conversation. Throughout my career, I've been heavily influenced by a sense of procedural and social justice. And yes, I'm keenly aware of the issues of police distrust that exist within the city of Baltimore and throughout the country. And I've committed myself to addressing these issues head on. As police commissioner for the city of Cambridge, I started the procedural justice section to monitor police-citizen interactions for indications of racial profiling or bias policing. And I hope to advance that work here at Hopkins. Since starting at Hopkins, I've focused on building relationships both with the Hopkins community and our neighbors in Baltimore. I've enjoyed getting to know so many of you during this year and hearing your perspectives on public safety. As I meet people, I continue to hear many voices that are supportive of the JHPD. I've also heard some voices that are less than supportive, but I would ask everyone to focus our energies on helping this become the highly accountable department it's meant to be. Public safety must include a deliberative process and continual community engagement. And although my office, in partnership with the broader community, university community, has the responsibility to make final decisions, we're going to seek your input at every key decision-making point. From the MOU we're discussing today to policies and formal avenues of accountability, we want to hear your opinions, histories, and expectations. I want to stress that this is just one step in a continuing process of engagement. I'll continue to attend your student groups, your faculty senates, and your community groups. If you invite me, I'm going to do my best to show up because community engagement is where the good work begins. And as we begin this conversation about the MOU, first, I want to tell you a little bit about our vision for public safety here at Hopkins, update you on what we've accomplished over the last year, and talk about next steps. But let me start by saying that although I come out of policing, I don't believe that policing alone is what defines public safety. I believe that there are many other things that governments and communities should do to help people feel safe and thrive. And that's true here at Hopkins. Even when fully implemented, the JHPD will only be one part of a comprehensive approach to public safety. That means that our system of public safety won't assume that every community problem or issue needs a police response. We're going to continue to prioritize root cause prevention efforts. Currently at Hopkins, we have a variety of public safety professionals and resources that include unarmed campus police officers, campus safety officers, and contract security officers. When the JHPD is formed, we're going to continue to maintain all of those services. We also recently launched our behavioral health crisis support team, where licensed clinicians work jointly with public safety officers to respond to individuals who are in the throes of a mental health crisis. Together with our community partners, we recently celebrated the completion of the first year of the $6 million Johns Hopkins Innovation Fund for Community Safety, which support community-led safety initiatives in Baltimore that address some of the root causes of violence. And as a university, we've been doubling down on our investments in the city's anti-violence initiatives. But none of what I just described leaves us adequately prepared to address those times when violence and serious crime impact us. And we can't ignore the fact that violence impacts us far more frequently than any of us can be comfortable with. Recently, we've experienced robberies, assaults, and even murder on or near our footprint in East Baltimore. And it impacts us in ways we can't truly measure. We don't know how many people don't come to our campuses for treatment or to work or to study because of the perception of violence. And that has to change. We've attempted to address this issue by using off-duty Baltimore City police officers and sheriffs, but we suffer from poor show-up rates because we know our partners are severely understaffed. So an additional element of public safety here at Hopkins going forward has to be the establishment of a small, publicly accountable university police department. For us, it's about creating a comprehensive but practical system of public safety that can match the right resource to the right problem or situation. That means someone in the throes of a mental health crisis gets a response from our behavioral health crisis support team, while someone being confronted with gun violence will receive an armed police response from the JHPD because it's the best resource for that problem. In 2019, the legislature passed the Community Safety and Strengthening Act, the most accountability-laden police legislation in the country. The legislation mandates oversight for the JHPD in many forms. It created the JHPD Accountability Board, which provides guidance on policy and practice. The JHPD won't have state immunity protections that apply to other departments in Maryland. The state mandated complaint process applies to the JHPD. The JHPD falls under the jurisdiction of the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board and the new Baltimore City Accountability Board. The legislation defines the scope of the JHPD. It limits the JHPD's jurisdiction to campus areas only. It limits the size of the JHPD to no more than 100 employees. It prohibits the acquisition of military-grade equipment, and it requires our officers to wear body-worn cameras. 2 years ago, Johns Hopkins paused the development of the JHPD, and during that time, the General Assembly passed sweeping police reform legislation. That pause provided me with the opportunity to get to know the Johns Hopkins community better and to understand Baltimore's community needs. We know this situation is urgent, but our focus in developing the JHPD, it has to be about doing it right rather than doing it fast. And there are going to be several opportunities for your participation in shaping the JHPD long before our officers ever go on patrol. This forum is one of those steps. We drafted the Memorandum of Understanding between Johns Hopkins University and Baltimore Police Department. These documents are the normal way in which university and municipal police departments outline how they'll work together. Memoranda of Understandings are normally narrowly focused to jurisdiction and operational issues, outlining things like which crimes and other incidents are investigated by the JHPD and which are investigated by BPD. It's also important to remember that the MOU is not a policy manual. We're going to have to develop policies that guide the day-to-day activities of the JHPD. And we're going to do that in consultation with the JHPD Accountability Board and share that information publicly. So our main purpose tonight is to get community feedback on an MOU, and we're going to spend the bulk of our time doing that. I'm confident that the final MOU is going to look different as a direct result of your feedback. Many of you are going to have questions and concerns that fall outside of the MOU, and those questions and concerns are going to be addressed as policies are developed. So tonight is our second forum about the prospective MOU. So let's begin that conversation and start our question and answer period.
Thank you, Dr. Bard. We're now going to move into the most important part of this evening, and that's hearing from you, those who are watching and those who are listening and live streaming. I'm going to ask Erica Bridgeford, Executive Director of the Baltimore Community Mediation Center, to provide an overview of discussion questions and explain the process for submitting comments and questions. Erica?
I am now unmuted. Good evening, everybody. So it is my pleasure to be here to deliver questions and comments from the community coming in through email and text message. We have quite a few questions here already. So I'm going to jump right into if you're watching the live stream, letting you know how you can submit questions through email and text that the JHU panel will either answer, or if they cannot answer it right now, they'll be keeping track of answers to come back later and post on the website the questions and answers that need to be answered from these town halls. After we get a few questions answered, then I'll pop in to remind you as well what the different types of discussion questions are. These discussion questions were designed for breakout to happen in the original way that the town halls were going to happen. There were going to be breakouts and open-ended questions that are asking people their thoughts about the MOU, to have those really hard conversations, get those hard questions and feedback out there. So I'm just going to make sure that people are aware of what those questions are, since we weren't able to have the breakouts, but you should still know what they are so that it can help get your juices flowing if there are parts of the MOU you hadn't thought about, asking questions about specifically. So first of all, if you're interested in sending in questions or comments about the MOU, you can email publicsafetyfeedback@jhu.edu. If you'd like to text in your question, please send it to 443-464-0832. So the first one is a question and a comment from someone. So it says, the current map that is shown online does not represent the language that is in the MOU that states JHU can expand its police force boundaries without further action from Annapolis, including residential homes on Calvert Street and Remington Avenue on the Homewood campus. Can you please explain to me why the current map on the website is currently omitting the outline of the area listed in the MOU that JHU has previously shared in communications? And then the second thing this person wants to say is, the last Homewood campus virtual hearing barely had any community feedback and was very poorly organized due to the haste which JHU put the virtual session in place, including stating multiple different emails during the session. I believe that JHU should hold another session for the Homewood campus, either in person or virtually. I'm not upset that the last forum was canceled, as protest is the foundation of a functioning democracy.
Okay, thank you, Erica. So just a reminder that our panel includes Dr. Bard, Rodney Hill, and from the Baltimore Police Department, Eric Melanson, Deputy Commissioner of Compliance. We'll start with Dr. Bard. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last question dealt with our boundaries, and specifically our boundaries on the Homewood campus. So the legislature defined 3 campus areas for us: one on Homewood, one in East Baltimore, and one at Peabody. The Homewood campus is, the street boundaries are University to 28th, Remington and Stony Run to Calvert Street. And it affects properties that are owned, leased, operated, or under the control of the university and used for educational or institutional purposes, and that fall in those boundaries. So we have jurisdiction to respond to properties that meet all 3 of those criteria. We'll have primary responsibility to respond to any crime in that area, but we only have jurisdiction in those specific locations. Now, the legislation was forward-looking enough to realize that some communities may want to expand those boundaries for JHPD and have JHPD extend into their area. And it set out a community process by which more than 50% of the majority of community support had to be present. And then City Council had to sign a resolution affirming that that was the case and that we adhered to the state mandated process. But the JHPD campus area, as defined by the legislation, is very restrictive.
Thank you. Dr. Bard, can you tell us, please, the current status of the JHPD effort?
Sure. So currently, we recently, as the subject of this meeting is this forum, is we recently posted publicly a draft of our MOU between the Baltimore Police Department and Johns Hopkins University. Those documents are the normal way in which college and university police departments communicate how they'll work with city and municipal police departments. So that puts us in a 30-day window for public comment. After that 30-day window, there's another 30-day period by which City Council gets to review and comment on the document. We're holding 3 public forums or town halls for the opportunity for our stakeholders to submit feedback. Our first one where we presented the MOU and received feedback was on September 22nd. Tonight is our second opportunity to present, where we present the MOU and get feedback. And then tomorrow, or September 30th, we're having our virtual town hall at 1 p.m. And that'll be another opportunity for individuals throughout all 3 of our campuses and the city to give us their feedback on the MOU. Once that process is played out, then we will review the feedback, synthesize it, publish a report on the feedback. I'm sure that the feedback that we receive is going to influence the final draft of the MOU, and then we'll sign the final draft of the MOU with the city of Baltimore's police department.
Thank you. Erica, are there additional questions that have come in?
Yeah. So this one says, I am a resident of Charles Village who lives at the boundary of the proposed Homewood Patrol area. I'm also a Hopkins faculty member. When we as Baltimore residents oppose the policies of the Baltimore Police Department, we do have the ultimate recourse of voting out the mayor who hired the police commissioner who put them into action. What recourse would we have should it turn out that we are strongly opposed to the practices of the JHPD? We could complain to the Police Accountability Board, but their role is purely advisory with no power to overrule the university administration, an elected body. My 25 years at Hopkins make me increasingly unwilling to trust the Hopkins administration to listen even to their own students, 75% of whom oppose the private police, or their own faculty members whose representatives in the KSAS and School of Public Health Senates passed resolutions opposing the private police. Oh, an unelected body, sorry, okay.
So as I mentioned earlier, the Community Safety and Strengthening Act, which authorized the JHPD, it set up many layers of accountability. So while it gave the JHPD Accountability Board advisory responsibilities and oversight, it also put the JHPD under the jurisdiction of the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board, and it now falls under the jurisdiction of the Baltimore City Accountability Board. So those are external accountability measures. Also, the creation of the JHPD Accountability Board allows us to increase internal accountability for the officers who work here. So there are multiple layers of accountability set that the JHPD has to operate under. In addition to the fact that, as you see in the MOU that was outlined by Senior Advisor Hill earlier, we've committed to adhering to the advanced standards outlined by the consent decree that the City of Baltimore's Police Department is under.
Thank you. Why does Johns Hopkins need an MOU?
So MOUs are the typical way in which college and university police departments operate with city and county police departments who they share concurrent jurisdiction with. They normally are narrowly focused, and they concern operational and jurisdictional issues only. And I don't want to hog up all of the answers, so I'll invite either Deputy Commissioner Melisone or Senior Advisor Hill to expand on the answer if they choose to.
No, I would just simply say in my experiences, as a chief legal advisor and with Baltimore County Police, we had numerous MOUs with other agencies as well. So as Vice President Bard said, it's very common for police departments just to talk about the interoperability where there is some overlap. So to make sure it's clear as to certain responsibilities, you don't want to make those things on the fly on the scene. You want them in advance, let them know who's going to do what and who's responsible for what. So if a situation comes up, you're trying to imagine various situations that happen, and it's laid out who's going to do what, who handles certain things.
Yeah, and I would add that a lot of what we've been able to achieve at the Baltimore Police Department in the last several years has put us on a path of setting the example for a lot of law enforcement agencies across the country. We have a vested interest in ensuring that those standards are maintained going forward in an environment where this jurisdiction is now being carried primarily by another law enforcement agency that's being stood up. So we have a vested interest in ensuring that those standards are being adhered to. And that's why it's a critical part of the MOU that we are negotiating, and an important part of ensuring that we are not just building the public trust with BPD, but setting that public trust up for success with JHPD.
Thank you. Just a reminder to the audience, you can submit questions by text and by email. Erica, are there additional questions that have come in this evening?
Yes. The following statement is feedback to include in the MOU. The question for tonight's forum is, can you please respond to the following statement and if you will change your ways and respect the will of Baltimore City voters? Baltimore residents, including JHU affiliates, are calling on Commissioner Harrison to immediately cease Baltimore City Police Department negotiations with Johns Hopkins University regarding the proposed Johns Hopkins Police Department. We request that you turn this controversial issue over to the citizens of Baltimore who are voting right now on question H to assume local control of Baltimore Police. Multiple forms of feedback and testimony to MDGA have shown JHPD is unfavorable. The legislation does not mandate JSU create a police force. Please give your response in the question and answer of today's forum. Thank you.
So I think that we can accept that there was a divergence of opinions about the JHPD, but the legislature took all of those factors and all of those concerns and utilized through their collective wisdom, they authorized the JHPD through the Community Safety and Strengthening Act. And as such, they built layers of accountability and narrowly defined the campus area and did many other things that were protective in scope to address some of the concerns. So it's been settled law since 2019 that the JHPD could exist. And this MOU is just another step in that process.
Dr. Bard, earlier you mentioned public comment period, and we do have people submitting questions tonight. There were some questions submitted at the last town hall, but if folks don't have an opportunity to ask their question tonight, how can the public share feedback on the MOU?
So they can share feedback at public safety feedback, one word, public safety feedback at jhu.edu. We'll also have another public forum tomorrow on which they can submit feedback, and they can also submit feedback through the JHPD Accountability Board.
Thank you. Erica, do we have more questions coming in this night?
Yes, one question is, what are hiring standards / requirements for the officers?
Senior Advisor Hill, you want to take that question, please?
Certainly. The hiring standards are laid out by Maryland statute and specifically by the Maryland Police Training Commission and COMAR, the Code of Maryland Regulations. It lays out such things as age requirement, education requirement. So there are minimum standards that the state of Maryland lays out. Then departments are allowed to go beyond those standards. And our plan is to go beyond the standards laid out in the Maryland Police Training Commission. So they are the same standards as any other police department in the state of Maryland. And we can go further and request additional things, such as we may say we want a certain number of hours in college or people with certain experiences prior to coming in. But the standards are the same. There are a background that have to be conducted. There is physical standards that they have to pass. There is a mental health screening and testing that has to be done. So there are, for all police officers in Maryland, there are set standards. And again, we can go beyond the standards if we so choose, and we'll just see how it pans out based on people who are applying and things like that.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the JHPD?
Sure. So the JHPD is going to be responsible for patrolling Johns Hopkins' building and property within that defined campus area. And we're also going to serve as the first responder for all calls within the campus area.
And can you please remind us again, what are the proposed boundaries of the JHPD?
Certainly. Once again, let's remember that it's property that's owned, leased, operated, or under the control of the university, used for educational or institutional purposes, and located within the specific boundaries of the Homewood, East Baltimore, and Peabody campus. The specific boundaries of the Homewood campus are University to 28th, Stony Run and Remington to Calvert. On the East Baltimore campus is Eager to Baltimore, Caroline to Castle. On the Peabody campus is Madison to Hamilton, St. Paul's to Cathedral.
Okay, and I have a follow-up to that question. This actually came up during the last town hall. It was a question that was asked at the very end. Can you describe how an incident would be handled if it occurs on a sidewalk within the campus area versus just outside of the campus area? Who responds?
Sure. I'll start, and then if the deputy commissioner or the senior advisor wants to answer. So describe how an incident will be handled if it occurs on a sidewalk within the campus area versus outside the campus area is the crux of the question. So if it happens on the sidewalk within the campus area, then it might get a dual response. It might get a response from the JHPD and the Baltimore City Police Department, because we both exercise concurrent jurisdiction there. If it happens outside of the campus area, well, then the JHPD doesn't have policing powers or responsibility, and you'll get a response from the Baltimore City Police Department. And if either one of the other panelists want to.
I think also, just to clarify, we are creating a space for the Johns Hopkins Police Force to be able to exert a jurisdiction and authority, but by no means is BPD not going to be involved in close partnership with how these calls for service are being handled, especially, and again, this is outlined in the MOU, if the nature of that call for service is a severe one, in which case BPD would still remain the lead investigatory agency responsible for handling some significant violent crimes. And again, that's outlined in what we're preparing to ensure that there's clarity in there. We welcome the support of the Johns Hopkins Police Force in helping us, maintain an active response, especially if there's a life-threatening situation. We want to make sure our people are safe. And I think that we would invite a cooperative partnership to ensure that public safety is being maintained, all within an understanding of who's responsible for what. But to put it a finer point, we're expecting and we want a close partnership with JHPD to ensure that the people of Baltimore are being kept safe.
Thank you. Let's take a few more questions from the audience that came in this evening. Erica?
The good news is there are a lot coming in, so it's okay. So this question says, why is JHPD only limited to 5 current BPD members per year?
So once again, I'll start, and then I'll kick it to the deputy commissioner. So it's in recognition of the fact that there are concerns about a new department depleting an already depleted and understaffed department in Baltimore City Police Department. So it's an initial stab at addressing the issue and realizing that, we want to be cognizant of not depleting BPD of valuable resources. I actually think that there's an opportunity, since we're a narrowly focused department and we're limited to no more than 100 employees. I see a scenario where we'll get far more applicants than positions that we have, and then we can, in turn, those individuals will seek out employment with the BPD. So I'm hoping we can be a multiplier for them in that way. Deputy Commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, I think you about summed it up. I think the concerns we have about the challenges of hiring sworn officers is a nationwide challenge. And I think we want to ensure that as we stand up this police force, we do so responsibly. And again, that it doesn't divert potential personnel resources from other areas of the city, because that would be the product of what would be occurring if we didn't have some form of consideration in what that practice looked like. And the BPD is, again, going to work in close partnership with sharing information about officers that are interested in joining the JHPD. The question about standards from earlier is a very important one. We want to ensure that a full record of any BPD officer who either is currently or past employed with the agency, those that have disciplinary records, those that have issues that are trying to seek reemployment, we will be fully transparent to ensure that that information is very well known, so that such hires are not made without that full background being done. And so that's something we're committed to as well.
Thank you. Erica, what else is coming in this evening?
Will the university control the recruitment, training, and oversight of the JHPD?
Yes, simple answer. We will be in charge of the training. We will identify training academies in which we will send them to. There will be additional, more advanced training that we may put on. We've made an agreement with BPD where we will pay for any advanced training that they put on. And there will be additional advanced training. Police officers attend advanced training all the time throughout the country, and we anticipate it'll be the same thing. We'll also maintain the recruitment, and we'll be in charge of our own recruitment as well.
And again, I want to make sure folks know that the BPD is also a resource for those kinds of best practices training that we've been able to have vetted through our Department of Justice, vetted through our monitoring team, to ensure that we are, again, making sure we're not being stingy with our resources when it comes to those best practices. And we will leverage and share that best practice with the Johns Hopkins PD to ensure that training is held to the highest standard. Again, it's a national standard that we're setting when it comes to how our agency is setting the path for how departments should be and developing and training that their workforce going forward.
As a department, we're going to invest heavily in training that stresses valuing the sanctity of human life and raising that above all else. Our officers are going to excel in de-escalating behaviors and resort to using force only when force is necessary and only after all other means have been exhausted. And even then, resort to only using the least amount of force necessary to accomplish the task.
Thank you. Eric, let's take one more.
This one is a comment. I had hoped that the revised protocol for this session would facilitate a community dialogue on this important issue, that there could be listening and learning. I arrived shortly after 7 o'clock to find that the protesters had again taken over the stage. I understand the complexity of allowing peaceful protests and the negative optics of interfering, but I'm frustrated that community questions and reflection were again drowned out, a loss for all from my perspective.
Again, we as a university, it's part of our core value to support free expression, but that free expression should never interfere with democratic processes like public deliberation, like this valuable community conversation. So we share your sentiment.
Thank you. Just a reminder that questions can be submitted this evening via text or via email. One of the questions that have come in over the past: what is the difference between the Baltimore City Police Accountability Board and the Johns Hopkins Police Accountability Board?
I'll ask our senior advisor to address those differences.
The Johns Hopkins Accountability Board is you can consider more of an advisory oversight in which they will review policies, they will review recruitment, they will review the entire agency, and they will make recommendations and advise the vice president for public safety. The Baltimore City Accountability Board, and that was by statute, the Johns Hopkins Accountability Board. The Baltimore City Accountability Board, also by state statute, gave all the counties and Baltimore City greater accountability, citizen accountability over the police by creating these accountability boards in each county and in Baltimore City. And the accountability boards for the city as well as the counties have jurisdiction and authority over things such as police discipline. So they are advisory, but they also have complete control over police discipline. They can review internal affairs investigations. They can make recommendations. They will set up the police trial boards. They will make recommendations as it pertains to punishment, and they will have the final say in a lot of disciplinary matters.
And just to clarify as well, there is a statewide disciplinary matrix from which all jurisdictions must adhere to. So it's not as though the Johns Hopkins PD will be able to have a different set of standards when it comes to how discipline needs to be applied when, in fact, a sustained case of misconduct is discovered. So the same standards that apply to BPD, that apply to indeed all the counties, and will also apply to the Johns Hopkins PD when it comes to discipline.
Thank you. Turning it back over to Erica now. Do we have additional questions that have come in?
Yeah, plenty. So this is a two-part. These are two questions from one person. Vice President Bard, in your announcement of August 23rd and since, you have said repeatedly that you are interested in the comments of the larger public, not just JHU affiliates. And indeed, the law requires that you solicit the input of the public. Then why hold both town halls in comparatively inaccessible, not especially welcoming on-campus facilities rather than in more neutral and accessible venues off campus? And why make the 30-day public comment period on the draft MOU so heavily dependent on online input when we know that older and lower income residents are less likely to use online format comments? And the second question is, JHU leadership has said that it does not now seek expansion of patrol boundaries beyond the 3 campuses and their immediate perimeters as defined by law. Even within these limits, the problems of concurrent jurisdiction are complicated enough. Can you commit now to not seeking expansion into adjacent neighborhoods beyond the campus perimeter in the future?
Okay, so I tried to scribble fast. Location of town halls. So we're statutorily confined to have forums, one for the Homewood and Peabody community on or near the Homewood campus, and one for the East Baltimore community on or near the East Baltimore campus. So that's why the locations were chosen, and the 30-day comment period is also statutory. But I want to remind everyone that, you know, this isn't the only mechanism. I continually attend community meetings, and since we've published the MOU, I've attended several community meetings. If you invite me, I'll attend yours and I'll get your feedback. And at any time, if you make a suggestion that's within, you know, the framework of the law, within 21st century policing that's protective of the public, I'm not bound to any period to listen to you. So, you know, just keep that in mind. When you talk about jurisdiction and expansion of jurisdiction, one of the beauties of the Community Safety and Strengthening Act was it left up to adjacent communities how they be impacted by the JHPD. So those requests are on the adjacent communities to decide whether they would like the expansion of the JHPD. Once they make that request, then obviously then it's a discussion that we would enter into. But the Community Safety and Strengthening Act left that firmly with adjacent communities.
Another question is, will the JHPD officers be armed? If so, with what items? How will they be trained on the use of force?
The short answer to that question is yes, the JHPD officers will be an armed police department, in stark contrast to the unarmed police department that Johns Hopkins currently has. Its purpose is to round out and complete our comprehensive public safety strategy, which currently doesn't allow us an adequate response for violence and serious crimes when they impact us. There was another part of your question, but I don't remember it.
It was, how will they be trained on the use of force? What items will they have if they'll be armed?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, our officers will be trained in de-escalation behaviors, and that's designed to make sure that the officers understand that using no force is the best option. And when they're required to use force, only to use the minimal amount of force. So officers are going to be, we focus on the fact that officers will be armed, presumably with handguns, but they'll also be armed with a cadre of less than lethal options, by which they can use to do their job. So, our officers in the JHPD, they're going to be held to a higher standard, but not to an unreasonable standard. And they're going to be supported and trained so that they can make better decisions, and they're going to be supplied with the tools that they need to do their job effectively and be servants to Johns Hopkins stakeholders in the community.
Thank you.
This question says the establishment of JHPD was put on pause for the past 2 years, in large part due to the protests after George Floyd's murder. What changed in the past 2 years that has prompted the university to move forward?
So I think a better question is, what's changed since the legislature authorized this collective wisdom, utilized this collective wisdom, and authorized the JHPD? And the answer to that is not much. We're still impacted by violence, and it still impacts us in ways that we can't truly measure. But what did happen during the pause that we can point to, one, the legislature passed sweeping police reform. I was onboarded, and I had an opportunity during the pause to attend hundreds of meetings and learn the Baltimore community, learn Johns Hopkins community. So there were many positive things. We also looked around the country at best practices and saw that that gave rise to the behavioral health crisis support team, where we have a licensed clinician now responding to an individual who are in the throes of a mental health crisis, because it's the best resource to send to that individual. It gave rise to the creation of the Innovation Fund, which is a $6 million 4-year program to support and boost up community-based safety initiatives. So a lot of positive came out of the pause, and it was a thoughtful thing to do. But we're still committed to moving forward with this small, publicly accountable university police department, because it's a necessary resource for us.
Thank you. As a reminder, we're in a period of time where we're asking for feedback on the MOU. Dr. Bard, you'd mentioned public comment period. Rodney went through some of the MOU earlier this evening, but if we can take a moment now and please talk about what's covered by the MOU.
Senior Advisor Hill, you mind going through that for us?
Certainly. Without having it in front of me, the MOU is about maybe 24 pages long. And again, the primary purpose is to talk about how the two agencies will operate with each other, such as it lays out primary jurisdiction of the Hopkins Police. Then it talks about the concurrent jurisdiction and makes it clear that the Baltimore Police still have jurisdiction on the property of Johns Hopkins, just like they do right this second as we speak. It makes it clear that the two will handle calls together and can respond and handle calls together, notwithstanding the existence of the Hopkins Police. But you consider this as a force multiplier, and that if there are areas that the Baltimore Police don't have to worry about being the primary responsibility, that then gives them the ability to send resources and other places throughout the city and not have to worry about the Hopkins campus, which is a very large footprint in the city. It covers things such as, again, I talked about it earlier, the evidence collection, who will do what. It talks about the Johns Hopkins will pay the salary for one evidence crime lab technician and analyst. And it lays out responsibilities for investigations as to who's responsible, what types of investigations. So it's a number of things like that. As Dr. Bard said earlier, most MOUs with police agencies, they're really dealing with operational things. Who responds, who handles what, who has what responsibility. And like I said earlier, you don't want some of these decisions made on the fly. You want to be very, very clear as to who has what jurisdiction if a certain situation were to occur.
Thank you. Related to that, will JHPD officers respond to calls that are off campus? How can you ensure this does not happen?
So when you say respond, JHPD has policing authority in its campus areas and not outside of its campus area. The legislation grants authority in several limited circumstances off of the campus area, but that's it. So if an incident happens in the campus area and an officer is in fresh pursuit, then they have authority. If it's to facilitate the flow of traffic, then they have authority. If it's during an emergency declared by the mayor or the governor, then JHPD would have authority. But other than those limited circumstances, the JHPD doesn't have authority off of campus areas.
And again, just to reiterate for folks' education, when a person from the public calls 911, it goes through a dispatching process that tries to determine to the best it can where the caller is calling from or where the incident in question requires a police response. And when that occurs, it goes through that process to ensure that the proper resource is only being dispatched to the proper location. And so that kind of process is always part of how we operate 24/7 to ensure that we are in adhering to who is in the right jurisdiction, who is in the right district, to make sure that the right resource is being applied.
Thank you. Erica, do we have additional questions that have come in?
I'm going to start with a follow-up question to one that was answered a little while ago. And the question was, what are the less lethal weapons that you mentioned? Will there be tasers?
So understand that the JHPD doesn't exist yet, and therefore we don't have an arsenal of weapons. Typically, tasers, oleocapsicum resin spray or pepper spray, batons make up that less lethal cadre of weapons that officers are armed with, defensive weapons that officers are armed with, but we don't have any weapons yet, and we don't have policies concerning the use of force yet. Those will be developed in combination with our accountability board, and that process will be transparent as well.
My neighborhood associate, is it me? Okay. This one says, my neighborhood association is in the Able Improvement Association, and we oppose the formation of JHPD and also oppose BPD signing the MOU. Given that overall Part 1 crimes around the Homewood and medical campuses has declined significantly in recent years, can you offer a justification why JHPD is needed and why you want officers to carry weapons when we already have a Baltimore Police Department?
So for me, it's not about X a number of crimes being committed. It's about crimes and serious crimes being committed, and us having the proper resource to respond in those limited circumstances when violence and serious crimes impact us. There's empirical evidence of individuals being robbed, assaulted, and even murdered on our campus. And so we want the small, publicly accountable university police department that'll be narratively focused for those times.
Thank you. Will having a JHPD eliminate the need for BPD and other off-duty officers on Hopkins campuses?
So that's the grand aim. Once fully staffed, the idea is that we will replace the off-duty program with JHPD officers. But you got to remember that we'll be building a department incrementally. So we'll be starting small and therefore may still need to rely, although less heavily, on our partners with BPD and the Baltimore County Sheriffs. But the grand aim is to replace that program with JHPD officers. We think we'll recognize several benefits. One, for the city at large, every call that we respond to is one that BPD doesn't have to respond to, and they're able to focus resources in other areas. We think that we'll benefit from increased response times because we'll have officers right here on our campus. We think that we'll benefit from increased engagement because unlike our partners with BPD who are going from call to call to call, our officers will have more time to focus on our community. And we think that we'll benefit from increased systems of internal accountability.
Related to that, will the current JH security officers and staff be replaced by JHPD hires?
No, the statute is very clear that we will maintain our security force. The security force is very large. There are a number of assignments that we couldn't possibly replace with 100 police officers. So the very short answer is no, they will not replace the security staff. They will remain in place.
Thank you. Erica, do we have additional questions from the audience tonight?
Yes. Let's not do this one. I might as well get this one out. Okay, so this is a question for Commissioner Bard. Can you comment on your decision to support the 2 officers that arrested and beat a Black Harvard student in 2018 and address how you will approach similar issues that may arise with the creation of a private Hopkins police force?
So that incident when I was the police commissioner for the city of Cambridge involved a naked young male who was taken into protective custody, not arrested, but taken into protective custody. During taking him into protective custody, force was used. I believe at the time of the incident that the officers acted in accordance with departmental policy and state law. And I took a use of force review, which is normally an internal process, and I committed to making it a public process. And not only just a public process, but I brought in an external reviewer to review that incident. And that external reviewer upheld that the incident was handled in accordance with policy and procedure and state law, and actually thought that the officers comported themselves exemplary. I can tell you that you can expect that same level of transparency here. And one thing that I also want with me here at Hopkins, but I also want to point out that that individual who was in the throes of crisis is today thriving.
Can you talk about how the behavioral health crisis support team will operate once there is a JHPD?
So the short answer is the same way it does now. Nothing's going to change. It's a valuable tool, and it's the best resource we understand for individuals who are experiencing mental health crisis. Not armed police, not police. So what it does is it pairs a licensed clinician with a specially trained public safety officer, and the public safety officer is in the background while the clinician takes the lead and gets that individual the support they need. So nothing's going to change.
Thank you. Erica, do we have additional questions?
This one is a question comment. Without JHPD, Baltimore police will police the area in any way they want. So isn't having JHPD a win for the community?
I think that having a JHPD is a win for the community, but for the reasons that I stated earlier. For every call that we go to, it's a call that BPD doesn't have to respond to, and it lightens their burden. It also gives us increased internal benefits in many ways. One, there are certain unique aspects to a campus that officers from outside the campus aren't familiar with. You call out a particular hall, and your own police officers, JHPD officers, will know right where that is. So if someone's in that particular location suffering from a serious injury or being faced with violence, then we won't be wasting precious seconds looking for that individual because we'll know right where to respond to. So you get many benefits from having your own dedicated resources.
We've talked about how BPD is understaffed. What will you do to make sure that JHPD does not make the situation worse for Baltimore Police Department?
Yeah. So I think we commented on that question earlier. We recognize that our partners with BPD are depleted. So we want to make sure that we don't do anything to exacerbate that problem. And that's why you see the language that you do in the memorandum of understanding. I also think that, there's another benefit to the creation of the JHPD because you're going to have some officers who've had stellar 25-year and 30-year careers with BPD, but they're aging out and they're retiring and they're going to be moving on and looking for second careers. And that's an opportunity for us to keep that valuable resource who have dedicated service for 3 decades to the city. And that'll be an opportunity for us to, take that individual and keep them in service to the community.
Erica, do we have additional questions?
This question says, what is JHPD going to do to make a positive impact on the community they will be serving?
So that's another great question, and it's another beauty of the Community Safety and Strengthening Act because it mandates certain community investments. One of the things I'm most excited about is that it requires that the JHPD and Johns Hopkins create a police athletic and activities league. And I believe that at least one. And I believe that that's going to be a valuable resource to the young youth of Baltimore and allow us to put not 24/7 programming, but I would like to have programming 7 days a week that lifts up and supports our young people in Baltimore and work closely with the already established Police Athletic and Activities League in the city.
Erica, we have, I think, 4 or 5 more questions coming in from the community. Let's go ahead and ask those. Thank you.
So this one says, what kind of benefits will a JHPD officer receive?
So we're not at that stage yet. So while we think we can put together a competitive package to make Johns Hopkins an attractive opportunity, we don't have a benefits package developed yet. But whoever asked that question, when we do, I encourage you to go to our website and apply.
Why doesn't Hopkins utilize the funds for the JHPD to invest in community health initiatives, given the data on the benefits of public health approaches to violence and crime prevention?
So it's always a both and. It's never just a one-sided approach. And we have to commit to do all of those things. We have to commit to programs that aim to attack the root causes of violence and crime, and also programs that allow for a police response when crime occurs, and that for that police response to be constitutional. So it's not either or. It has to be a both and we have to understand that if you want to be successful in driving down crime and violence, then you must have that multifaceted approach.
And I would say that Johns Hopkins has invested significantly in the mayor's group violence reduction strategy overall. which is again designed to help address the root causes of violence in our city, and again is done in partnership with a comprehensive approach that involves multiple agencies that are not public safety agencies, but health agencies, social services, education. These are important components that we must address in a, as you said, sir, a both-and approach.
So this one is a comment. I have been a JHU employee for 33 years, and I am fully in favor of the implementation of the JHPD. I commend the thoughtful and mindful approach that you are taking throughout this process and in gathering feedback from the community. I trust that you will continue with this diligent approach as you continue the implementation of the JHPD. Anybody want to respond to the comment?
Yeah, I was just going to thank you for that support. We definitely appreciate it. We definitely know there is a very large body, and I would say the majority of people who are in support of this. We get, I have people approach me all the time about their support because they recognize the need for it. But more importantly, there are many folks who we've even talked about. They've met Dr. Bard, and they trust in his vision and his decisions and what this agency is going to look like. Our plan is, notwithstanding the deputy commissioner, Baltimore City, who's on with us, but our plan is to make this the best police department in the country. That is what we're going to do, and that's what it's going to look like. So we definitely appreciate that support, because I think so many times the support gets drowned out. And as I believe someone said earlier, the idea of these forums is to have the back and forth conversation. Eric has been trying to get that going, and dialogue, and make it fruitful and not just one-sided. So we definitely thank you for saying that.
And I would say to Mr. Hill that we welcome the friendly competition about which is the best. However, again, part of what we want to do is ensure that as we build this going forward, we do so modeling the national best practice, a large part of which is coming from out of BPD's consent decree process. We've had our mistakes and our problems in the past. We do not want to repeat those. We want to learn from them, ensure that we rebuild the trust in the public, because it's ultimately our goal to ensure that public safety in the city of Baltimore is a cooperative effort, not just for the police doing it alone, but in partnership with the communities that we serve.
Just a reminder to everyone, you can submit your questions and your comments by text at 443-464-0832 or by email, publicsafetyfeedback@jhu.edu. We'll continue to receive those comments and those questions via email after the session tonight. But please use those this evening to continue to submit your comments and questions. Erica, do we have anything else from the audience?
Yes. Vice President Bard has confirmed this evening that the JHPD will be armed. According to prominently displayed signage, Johns Hopkins Hospital does not permit guns on its grounds. How and why will JHPD be permitted to carry weapons when the hospital doesn't allow it? And why is the use of force not significantly addressed in the MOU?
So once again, let me just remind everybody that this is a university police department, not for the health system. And why? And remember, the MOU, when you ask why isn't the use of force addressed, because the MOU is narrowly focused to operational and jurisdictional issues. Our policies, which will be best in class, will handle the use of force issues.
And just to clarify, I think the question from the member of the public, when we have incidents, a shooting or God forbid a murder, and we have to transport members to the hospital, our officers who are armed are helping to bring that person, that victim, to the hospital. The prohibition that's you're speaking of about weaponry has to do with members of the public that are not law enforcement. And so part of our course and scope of duties is that we must have our personnel be able to carry those firearms in course and scope of their jobs. So the prohibition I think that you're talking about is not applicable in this case, but I would defer to Mr. Hill if I'm mischaracterizing that.
No, Deputy, you said it just right. And the prohibition is there for citizens, people coming off the street with weapons. Look, it's no different than the airport where you can't go past security with weapons, but members of the TSA or the airport police clearly walk past security and they're carrying weapons. It's the same type of thing.
Okay, so this one says, will the citizens have access to the body-worn camera footage like they do with BPD?
The short answer is yes.
Absolutely yes.
Sorry, Doc, I was talking over you.
You can go ahead. I'll punt.
Okay, no, the short answer is yes. If you read the statute, the enabling statute, one of the things it says is we, notwithstanding the fact that Hopkins is a private entity, that we will be subject to the Maryland Public Information Act. Therefore, just like any MPIA requests that go to Baltimore City or any other Maryland agency, an MPIA can be made to the Hopkins Police, and consistent with the MPIA and the release of body-worn camera footage, it can be released.
So this last question is, well, it's not the last question that's coming in, but it's the last one we have time for. So I just want to remind everybody that as your questions come in, they will be answered and they will be taken and answered on the website. And because there have been a lot of questions and comments about the format of these conversations and how there hasn't been a lot of space for community, like actual back and forth, and making sure people feel heard and understood, I just want to say out loud that that was the process that we designed together. It's the reason I was asked to come in to help with this conversation, to help be a bridge for people who wanted to ask questions about the MOU, give feedback about the MOU, hold JHPD accountable as the MOU and the rest of it is moving forward. And so there were definitely going to be in-person conversations, back and forth dialogue, making sure everybody's voices were heard and understood. And so this was the best that we could do given everything that was happening. But I just want to make that clear that it wasn't originally designed to be online, on each side of it. It really was going to be a human experience for everybody. So this last question is, I understand the need for this police force, though the 75% number of students opposing the force given earlier was clearly not representative. There's obviously some vocal opposition to the JHPD. How will this impact the force's ability to do their jobs?
I'm sorry, Ms. Bridgeford. Could you repeat that question, or if you
Sure,
heard
no problem.
Rodney?
Yeah. So this person is asking, I understand the need for this police force, though the 75% number, and then they said in parentheses, of students opposing the force given earlier was clearly not representative. There is obviously some vocal opposition to the JHPD. How will this impact the force's ability to do their jobs?
So I think that the opposition or any, the checks on the University of the Police Department are a good thing. I think that's why the legislature put the accountability board in place. And, I think that it's clear that not just this department, but all law enforcement agencies should willingly submit to checks on our authority. We work for the public, and everything we do should be geared towards, submitting willfully to public accountability. So those voices, are going to continually come in and make sure that we're living up to the standard that we profess to want to live up to. So I have no qualms about any opposing voice or any voice that seeks to place checks and balances on our authority or the police department.
Thank you. And that's all the time that we have this evening for questions and answers. I want to thank the full panel for your participation tonight. And I'd like to give an opportunity for Dr. Bard and Deputy Commissioner Molassen for closing comments.
You want to go first, Deputy?
Certainly. Thank you. And again, I want to thank the folks from Johns Hopkins for the opportunity for the police department to be a part of these discussions. There's a lot of issues that we want to make sure folks have full understanding and transparency for when it comes to standing up the Johns Hopkins police force. We want to make sure, as I said previously, that the lessons learned from the Baltimore Police Department, the fact that we are, in a consent decree and that we are in need of reform, that those lessons are not lost on the establishment of a new police department in our jurisdiction. And so we want to work in close partnership. We want to make sure that things like use of force, fair and impartial policing standards, the application of stop, searches, and arrest policies, these things we have to make sure we're doing these things, whether it's from the BPD or a new police force like the Johns Hopkins police force, to be able to do that in a way that's not only constitutional, but build relationships with the public, repairs broken relationships, and strengthens the relationships that we know we need to strengthen. And so we stand in partnership with this effort to ensure that we're doing it the right way, with the lessons learned, and that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So again, I want to thank Dr. Bard, Mr. Hill, and the entire panel for our participation in this event today.
Thank you, Deputy. Yeah, and I'll close by saying that I've long believed that law enforcement policies must be protective of the public, but at the same time fair to the men and women who we charge with enforcing the law. And if those two concepts should ever clash, then being protective of the public must carry the day. And our officers here at the JHPD, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to hold them to a higher standard, but it's not going to be an unreasonable standard. They're going to be supported with the training and the materials that they need to be their best and be of best service to you. So we're committed to establishing a small, publicly accountable university police department, one that works for you and serves you. So thank you for attending this valuable community conversation as we presented the MOU and discuss your questions and feedback.
And I'd like to thank everyone again for coming out tonight or from logging on from your home and sharing your feedback. And as we shared earlier, the town halls are one of several ways that Johns Hopkins is collecting feedback on the MOU. Please continue to submit your questions and your comments via that email address that we shared earlier, that will also be available on the Johns Hopkins Public Safety website. As we shared earlier, again, the town halls are one of several ways. In a few days, there will be a summary of the feedback from tonight's meeting available on Johns Hopkins Public Safety website. At the end of the public comment period in the coming month, there will be a final report on all of the comments and how, where, and why they will be incorporated into the MOU, or, as Dr. Bard stated earlier, other policies for the JHPD, because that MOU is very narrowly defined. Again, we want to thank everyone for coming this evening and logging on, and have a good night.